When the powerful patriarch of the Waverly Empire meets a humble young architect, an old photograph exposes a truth buried for decades. The stranger he invited into his home is the son he was forced to abandon. As pride, guilt, and love collide, one man's final act of courage will shatter lies, heal generations, and prove that forgiveness is the richest inheritance of all. Before we continue, subscribe now to the channel to receive powerful, heart-touching stories every day. The Waverly Mansion stood like a monument of silence. Beyond its marble halls and golden chandeliers, time seemed frozen, as if even the air had learned to hold its breath. Harold Waverly, 78, sat by the wide window overlooking the gray gardens. Once the most feared name on Wall Street, now he was just an old man in a wool cardigan, a cane resting beside his trembling hand. His empire still stood, but his peace had long crumbled. Across the hall, Damian Waverly, his 40-year-old son, paced with impatience, his sharp suit reflecting the coldness of his eyes. He was the heir to everything, and he carried that title like a crown of ice. "Father," he said, stopping at the door, "we have the investors' dinner tonight. Don't forget to look alive." But Harold didn't answer. His gaze was fixed on something only he could see, a ghost from decades ago. When the sound of the gate echoed through the vast property, Harold's heartbeat stumbled. He didn't know why, but as the butler announced, "A young man named Lucas Bennett is here to see you," the old man's world began to shake in silence. The front doors opened to reveal Lucas Bennett, 22, slender but confident, holding a rolled blueprint under his arm. His eyes carried a quiet mix of humility and determination, the kind of look that came from working twice as hard for half the recognition. "Good afternoon, sir," he said politely to the butler. "I was asked to deliver this restoration proposal for the old library wing." When Lucas stepped into the grand foyer, he froze. The vast marble staircase, the oil portraits, the faint scent of cedar, they all felt oddly familiar, as if the house itself whispered memories that didn't belong to him. From the top of the stairs, Grace, the aging housekeeper who had served the Waverlys for over 40 years, appeared. Her hands trembled as she recognized the boy's face. "Bennett," she murmured, her eyes welling with disbelief. Down the hall, Damian caught sight of the visitor and frowned. "Another contractor?" he muttered, brushing past Grace. But when Harold heard Lucas's name echo through the mansion, his glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the marble. His eyes widened, and for the first time in years, he whispered a name no one had heard since his youth. "Clara." The name Clara fell into the room like thunder. Damian froze, confused, but Harold's trembling voice carried something deeper than memory. It carried regret. The old man's knuckles whitened around the armrest of his chair. "Bring him to me," he ordered softly. Lucas followed the butler into the drawing room, unaware of the storm he was walking into. He paused when he saw the frail man in the wheelchair by the window. "Mr. Waverly?" he asked with respect. "It's an honor to meet you. I just wanted to deliver this personally, sir." Harold's eyes never left his face. The shape of the jaw, the same shade of hair, details that pierced through decades of silence. "Your name, you said Bennett?" Harold asked, his voice fragile. Lucas nodded, puzzled. "Yes, sir. My mother was Clara Bennett." The air in the room turned heavy. Grace gasped quietly, pressing a hand over her mouth. Damian looked between them, suspicion rising. Harold's eyes filled with tears that refused to fall. "Clara Bennett," he whispered again, almost to himself. "So the world finally brought you back to me." Damian crossed his arms, watching in disbelief as his father's composure dissolved. "Father, do you know this boy?" he asked, his tone sharp. But Harold didn't answer. His mind was no longer in that room. It was drifting back to the summer of 1999, when a young woman named Clara Bennett used to hum softly while tending the roses outside his office window. Her laughter had been sunlight in a house built of marble and ambition. I worked here once," Lucas said carefully, glancing at Grace. "Well, my mother did. She spoke of this place, but never about why she left." Grace turned away, her voice trembling. "She left because she had no choice." Damian's jaw tightened. What is that supposed to mean? Harold's hand shook as he reached for the photograph resting beside his chair, a faded picture of a young woman with kind eyes and a baby in her arms. The image had survived years of dust and guilt. His voice cracked as he whispered, That child had your eyes. The room fell silent, except for the faint ticking of the antique clock, marking the moment everything began to change. Damien's expression hardened as he stepped closer to his father. Are you saying this boy is what? Some kind of relative? His voice sliced through the air like glass. Harold didn't respond. He simply looked at Lucas as if searching for proof in the young man's face, a proof that reason could no longer deny. Lucas shifted uncomfortably, feeling the weight of their stares. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to cause trouble, he said, holding the rolled blueprint tighter. I only came to deliver this project. My mother, she taught me to work hard, to never expect anything from anyone. His tone was respectful, but there was pain beneath it, a lifetime of trying to belong somewhere. Grace finally spoke, her voice breaking the tension like a whisper of truth. Harold, she said softly, he has her eyes. The old man's breath caught. Damien scoffed, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his gaze. Harold's trembling hand reached for the cane beside him. Grace, he murmured, bring me my watch. Grace hurried from the room, her old shoes echoing faintly against the polished floor. Harold's breathing grew uneven, his fingers drumming weakly against the armrest. Damien sighed in frustration. Father, please, this is ridiculous, he muttered. You don't even know this kid. But Harold's silence carried more weight than any argument. Moments later, Grace returned with a small silver pocket watch, tarnished, yet carefully polished around the edges, as if handled countless times. She placed it gently in Harold's shaking hands. He pressed the latch open. Inside, under a cracked layer of glass, was a faded photograph of Clara Bennett, smiling with a baby in her arms. Lucas froze. He didn't need to ask who the baby was. The truth was written in the reflection of his own face. Harold's eyes filled, his voice trembling like an old confession. I've looked at this picture every day for 20 years, and now that child stands before me. Damien's throat tightened. Are you saying? But Harold interrupted, whispering through tears. Yes, he's the son I lost. The next morning, the mansion was quieter than usual, too quiet. Even the staff moved slower, whispering in corners. Damien avoided his father's study, pacing the balcony instead, his thoughts spiraling between disbelief and fear. Downstairs, Harold sat by the fireplace, staring at the same photograph. He could no longer pretend it was coincidence. He asked Grace to deliver a message. Lucas Bennett was to return to the Waverly estate that afternoon. The official reason, to discuss the restoration project. But the real reason burned in Harold's chest like an old wound reopening. He needed to know if fate had truly brought back the life he once buried in silence. When Lucas arrived later that day, his steps echoed through the same marble foyer. The light filtering through the stained glass windows painted his face in colors of gold and sorrow. Harold greeted him softly. Thank you for coming, son, he said, then quickly corrected himself. Mr. Bennett. Lucas smiled politely, unaware of how that single word had almost shattered the old man's composure. Damien watched from the upper landing, eyes dark with suspicion. Harold gestured for Lucas to sit across from him in the study. The room smelled of aged paper and cigar smoke, the walls lined with books that had witnessed too many secrets. Tell me about your mother, Harold said, his tone gentle but trembling beneath the weight of emotion. Lucas hesitated. She was strong, he replied. She never complained, even when life was hard. She worked in houses like this one, though she never said much about where. When I was a child, she used to hum a song, the same one every night. I didn't know why, but it always made her cry afterward. Grace, standing quietly near the door, turned away, wiping her tears in silence. Harold gripped the edge of the desk, his eyes glistening. Your mother? Did she ever mention a man named Harold? Lucas frowned. No, she never spoke of anyone. Just that some promises are too painful to remember. The words pierced like a blade. Harold lowered his head, his voice cracking. Then she kept my secret better than I deserved. Harold's fingers trembled as he reached for a small brass key hanging from a chain around his neck. He unlocked the bottom drawer of his mahogany desk, a drawer no one but him had opened in over 20 years. From within, he pulled out a small wooden box, the edges worn and faded by time. Inside were dozens of envelopes, yellowed and bound with a silk ribbon. Each bore the same name written in his careful, youthful handwriting, Clara Bennett. Lucas stared at them, speechless. Grace covered her mouth in disbelief. Harold swallowed hard. I wrote her every month after she left, he said, his voice breaking. But she never answered. Later, I discovered why. Your grandmother intercepted them. She didn't want a scandal to stain the family name. Lucas touched one of the envelopes, his fingertips brushing against the ink that once carried his father's unspoken love. You tried to find her? He whispered. Harold nodded painfully. I did. But when I finally went looking, she was gone. And I told myself it was too late. His voice softened to a fragile whisper. But the truth never dies. It just waits for courage to face it again. The study door swung open without warning. Damien stepped in, his face pale with fury. What the hell is going on here? His voice echoed against the bookshelves. His eyes darted from the old letters to his father's tear-streaked face, then to Lucas. Are you seriously telling me this stranger is part of our family? Harold tried to stand, but his legs gave out, forcing him back into the chair. Damien, please, he said weakly. There are things you don't understand. Damien's voice sharpened like glass. No, father. I understand perfectly. You're replacing me. All because of some fantasy about a maid you once pitied. Lucas stood frozen, guilt flickering in his eyes. I didn't come here to take anything, he said quietly. I didn't even know, but Damien cut him off. Of course you didn't. You just happened to walk in here, and suddenly your family. Grace stepped between them, her tone shaking. Enough, Damien. You have no idea what this house cost your father's heart. But her words only deepened the silence. Harold's voice finally broke through, trembling yet clear. He's not here to replace anyone. He's here because the truth has finally found me. The room seemed to stop breathing. Damien stood motionless, fury fading into disbelief, while Harold reached across the desk, his frail hand trembling as it hovered above Lucas's. For so many years, I lived surrounded by wealth and silence, Harold began, voice low and unsteady. But every night, I saw your mother's face in my dreams, and yours, though I didn't yet know it. Lucas's throat tightened. Why didn't you come for us? He whispered. Harold's eyes filled with tears. Because I was a coward. Because I chose reputation over love. I told myself it was to protect you. But truthfully, I was protecting myself. He exhaled slowly, the sound like the breaking of glass. But I see it now, the eyes, the smile. You are my son. Grace wept silently in the corner. Damien's breath shook as he looked at them both, father and stranger, bound by something deeper than blood. You can't just say that and expect me to accept it, Damien muttered, though his voice had lost its edge. Harold gripped Lucas's hand tightly, his eyes locked on his son's. The world may doubt it, but I know what my heart remembers. You are my child, Lucas, my only true redemption. The confession spread through the mansion like wildfire. Whispers filled the corridors. The maids, the driver, even the gardeners had heard it. The master found a son he never knew. By evening, reporters lingered at the gates, hungry for scandal. Inside, the tension thickened with every passing hour. Damien sat alone in the dim parlor, the fire flickering against his restless face. Grace entered quietly, setting down a tray of tea. Your father's heart has carried this for decades, she said softly. He's not stealing your place, Damien. He's trying to heal before it's too late. Damien looked up, his voice bitter. Heal? He shattered everything our family ever stood for. Grace shook her head. No, he's rebuilding it, with truth this time. Upstairs, Harold sat with Lucas in the study, his hand resting weakly over his son's. I've spent my life building walls to protect this family, he murmured. But those walls turned into my prison. I won't let pride steal another generation. Lucas nodded slowly, his heart pounding with a mix of pain and compassion. But downstairs, Damien rose from his chair, his shadow stretching across the marble floor. He wasn't ready to let go of the throne he believed was his by right. The next morning, the Waverly mansion filled with tension so thick it felt carved into the air itself. Harold had called for an urgent family meeting in the study. Grace stood near the door, hands clasped, while the family lawyer unfolded a set of crisp documents on the mahogany desk. Damien arrived last, his expression unreadable, his every step echoing defiance. Harold's voice trembled, but his eyes were steady. Before this illness takes what time I have left, he said, I must put my house in order, not just in wealth, but in truth. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. Mr. Waverly has revised his will, he began, granting part of his estate and company shares to Lucas Bennett. The words sliced through the room. Damien's chair screeched against the floor as he stood. You can't be serious, he shouted. This boy walks in off the street and suddenly becomes your heir. Harold turned toward him, calm yet resolute. No, Damien. He doesn't become my heir. He already is. I'm simply correcting the lie I allowed to live for too long. Damien's jaw tightened. You're destroying our family. Harold's weary eyes glistened. No, son. I'm saving what's left of it. The air in the study grew thin. Damien's fury boiled over as he slammed his fist on the desk. You're throwing away everything you built, he shouted. For a stranger you barely know. Harold's face was pale, his breath shallow. He's not a stranger, he said softly. He's blood of my blood. Something you've never learned to value. Don't you dare lecture me about value. Damien snapped, his voice cracking under the weight of betrayal. I spent my whole life earning your respect, and now you hand it to him. The silence that followed was broken only by the ticking clock. Lucas rose from his chair, voice steady but heavy with emotion. I don't want your fortune, he said. I came here out of respect, not greed. But Harold's body trembled violently. His cane slipped from his grasp. Grace cried out as he collapsed against the chair, gasping for air. Father, Damien shouted, rushing forward, catching him before he fell. The lawyer fumbled for his phone, calling for help. Amid the chaos, Harold's frail hand reached blindly, and Lucas caught it, holding tight. Don't let this be for nothing, Harold whispered weakly, his voice fading into a fragile echo that hung in the room long after he went still. The sterile white of the hospital room felt almost unreal compared to the golden halls of the Waverly mansion. Machines hummed softly, their lights blinking like small, steady heartbeats. Damien sat beside his father's bed, eyes red, shoulders slumped under a weight he could no longer hide behind arrogance. Lucas stood quietly near the window, his gaze fixed on the first pale light of dawn. When Harold stirred, both men turned instantly. His voice was faint, barely a whisper, but clear. My sons. The word itself made Damien flinch. Harold reached for their hands, one weak, trembling hand taking each of theirs. I built a fortune, he said slowly, but I never built peace. Don't repeat my mistakes. Wealth fades, names fade, but forgiveness endures. A tear slipped down Damien's face before he could stop it. Lucas squeezed his father's hand gently, trying to hold back his own emotion. Harold managed a fragile smile. "You are my greatest legacy," he breathed. And then, as the sun rose through the hospital blinds, Harold's hand went still, the faint rhythm on the monitor fading into silence. Grace, standing in the doorway, crossed herself and whispered, "He finally found peace." Weeks passed, and the once silent halls of the Waverly mansion began to echo with new sounds: hammers, laughter, hope. The estate, once a fortress of pride, was being reborn under Lucas's direction. He had chosen not to keep the wealth for himself, but to restore the mansion into something his father would have admired in spirit, not in status: a center for youth education and art. On the day of the reopening, Damien stood beside him for the first time without tension in his shoulders. He looked around the grand hall, now filled with children sketching and painting beneath the chandeliers. "He would have liked this," Damien murmured. Lucas nodded, smiling faintly. "He finally taught us what really matters." At the mansion's entrance hung a bronze plaque, engraved with simple words that carried generations of meaning. "In memory of Harold Waverly, who chose forgiveness over pride." As the doors opened to the public, sunlight poured through the stained glass windows, casting colors of gold and blue across the floor. The same light that had once fallen on regret, now shining on redemption. Grace stood near the doorway, tears in her eyes, whispering to herself, "He kept his promise at last." And as Lucas turned to look at the horizon, the faint wind through the trees seemed to carry his father's voice. "Peace, my son. You gave me peace." If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and share this video so more people can discover that even the smallest act of courage can change the world. Write in the comments, "I believe in the power of courage." Together, let's spread stories that transform lives and prove that hope can rise from the most unexpected voices. Thank you so much for your support.